He's the strongest man you never knew was scared. Jerry Lawler wore a crown in Memphis for decades. He called himself the king, but kings live with fear. They hide it, they bury it, they pretend it does not exist. Lawler ruled Memphis wrestling from the 1970s through the 1990s. Every Monday night, thousands of fans packed the Mid-South Coliseum. They came to see their king fight monsters and madmen. Lawler made it look easy. He threw his famous right hand. He pulled down his strap. He won the crowd. But behind the crown was a man who knew real danger. He wrestled shooters who could break bones. He fought chaos agents who refused to follow the script. He faced giants with weapons that were not fake. And through it all, he managed his fear like a business. Because in Memphis, fear was not just personal, it was professional. If Lawler showed weakness, the territory collapsed. If he refused to fight someone dangerous, the money dried up. So he stepped into the ring with 10 men who truly shook him. This is not a list of his greatest rivals. This is a list of the men who made the king feel small. Before we dive deeper into this story, take a moment to use the hype feature and give this video some hype. It helps us bring you more content like this, and it only takes a second. Now let's get back to the fear behind the crown. Memphis wrestling was not polished, it was not safe. It was a weekly grind that demanded blood and chaos. Lawler was not just the star, he was often the booker and part owner. His income came from ticket sales. When a villain arrived in town, Lawler had to work with them. He could not say no. If the villain was unstable, dangerous, or violent, Lawler still had to step into the ring. His body was the product. His survival was the business model. The Mid-South Coliseum drew 8,000 to 10,000 people every Monday night. That was real money, real pressure, real stakes. And Lawler's famous stiff right hand was not just a move. It was a warning. It told giants and shooters that he could hurt them too. But even that punch had limits. There were 10 men who made Lawler realize that his right hand was not enough. These 10 men represented different types of fear. Some could hurt him for real. Some could not be controlled. Some made him feel not good enough. And some could start riots that would destroy everything he built. The fear came in 4 shapes. The shooters were men with the ability to cause real physical harm. They had authority. They had training. They could break your arm and call it an accident. These men were not pretending. They had the skill to hurt you legitimately. And they had the temperament to do it if you crossed them. The unpredictable forces were chaos itself. They did not follow scripts. They did not care about the story. They could turn a match into a real fight at any moment. You could not trust them. You could not predict them. You could only hope they would cooperate long enough to get through the match. The professional benchmarks were men who made Lawler feel insecure. They were better looking, more technical, or more charismatic. They made him fear that he was not good enough to stand beside them. They made him question his value. They made him wonder if the crown was deserved. And the outsiders were the most dangerous of all. They were not trained wrestlers. They did not know the rules. They brought lawsuits, riots, and liability into the ring. They represented threats that could not be solved with a punch. Lawler had to manage all 4 types of fear. He could not run from any of them, so he built a career on survival. He was not a safe king. He was a man always watching his back. 10. Andy Kaufman, the outsider who brought the riot. Andy Kaufman was a comedian. He was slight. He wore a neck brace. He could not throw a punch. He had no athletic ability. He had no training. He was not a wrestler in any sense of the word. Yet Lawler admits that Kaufman caused him the most stress. This is the great irony. The weakest man on the list was the most dangerous. Kaufman did not know the rules of wrestling. He was an outsider, and that made him a liability. The feud between Lawler and Kaufman became the first viral wrestling moment. It ended with a slap on live television. Lawler slapped Kaufman on late night with David Letterman. The world watched. Millions of people saw it, and Lawler feared the fallout. Was Kaufman hurt? Would there be a lawsuit? Would the network ban him? Would this end his career? The line between reality and fiction blurred so badly that Lawler lived in constant anxiety. Every day brought a new question. Every appearance brought a new risk. Every interview brought a new possibility of disaster. But the real fear was not legal. It was physical. The Memphis fans hated Kaufman with a violent passion. The Mid-South Coliseum was a powder keg every time Kaufman appeared. Lawler knew the crowd could explode at any moment. He feared that a fan would jump the rail and kill Kaufman. And if that happened, Lawler would be responsible. He was the one who brought Kaufman into this world. He was the one who created the heat. He was the one who made the fans hate Kaufman so much. So during every match, Lawler had to protect Kaufman from the mob. He had to make sure the crowd stayed angry, but not violent. He had to control chaos that he himself had created. The atmosphere in the building was volatile every single time. Fans screamed for Kaufman's blood. They threw objects kicks at him. They pushed against the barricades. They wanted to hurt him. Lawler spent every second of every match calculating distances, watching the crowd, making sure no one got too close, making sure security was in position, making sure escape routes were clear. The man he could beat with one hand was the one who scared him most, because Kaufman represented something Lawler could not punch. He represented lawsuits and riots and the collapse of everything. The Letterman incident proved that. When Lawler slapped Kaufman on national television, he did not know if it would end his career. He did not know if Kaufman would press charges. He did not know if NBC would blacklist him. He did not know if sponsors would pull out. The uncertainty ate at him, and that uncertainty lasted for years because the feud kept going, the lines kept blurring, and Lawler kept having to step into the ring with a man who could destroy his livelihood without throwing a single punch. That is fear at its purest. That is the way to protecting someone while pretending to destroy them. Every night, Lawler had to make it look like he hated Kaufman, but every night, he also had to make sure Kaufman went home alive. That double burden crushed him because one mistake meant everything collapsed. One fan getting past security meant a tragedy. One injury to Kaufman meant lawsuits that could bankrupt the territory. So Lawler carried that fear every single night, and it was heavier than any championship belt. 9. Nick Bockwinkel, the man who could expose him. Nick Bockwinkel was the AWA World Heavyweight Champion. He was polished. He was articulate. He had a Beverly Hills arrogance that made him feel untouchable. He spoke like a scholar. He moved like a dancer. He wrestled like an artist. And Lawler was terrified of him, not because Bockwinkel would hurt him, but because Bockwinkel could expose him. Lawler has said that Bockwinkel made him nervous because Nick was too good. Bockwinkel could wrestle for 60 minutes without breaking a sweat. He chained holds with surgical precision. He made wrestling look like an art form. He transitioned from move to move so smoothly that it looked effortless. He could out-wrestle anyone. He could out-talk anyone. He was the complete package. And Lawler was not that kind of wrestler. Lawler was a brawler. He punched. He kicked. He relied on his right hand and his charisma. He pulled down his strap and threw his right hand. That worked in Memphis. The fans loved it. They came every week to see it. But against Bockwinkel, it might not be enough. The fear was simple. If Lawler could not keep up, he would look like an amateur. He would look like a local guy who did not belong on the national stage. The critics already said that. They had been saying it for years. They said Lawler was just a Memphis guy. They said he was a regional star who could not cut it outside his territory. They said he was popular because he controlled the booking. They said he was not a real wrestler. A match with Bockwinkel carried the weight of the AWA World title. If Lawler had a bad performance, he would prove the critics right. He would validate every doubt anyone ever had about him. He would confirm that he was just a local guy playing dress-up. So he feared being outclassed. He feared being out-wrestled. He feared looking small next to a grandmaster. Bockwinkel represented everything Lawler was not. Grace, technique, sophistication, national credibility. Standing across from him was like standing across from a mirror that showed all your flaws. Every weakness was magnified. Every limitation was obvious. This fear pushed Lawler to have some of the best technical matches of his career. He studied. He prepared. He watched tapes of Bockwinkel. He adapted his style. He slowed down. He thought more. He wrestled smarter. He added holds he normally did not use. He worked on his transitions. He tried to match Bockwinkel's pace and precision, but the fear never left. Because deep down, Lawler knew that Bockwinkel was better. He knew that no amount of preparation would make him as good as Nick. And a king who feels small is not a king. He is just a man pretending. And pretending takes energy. It takes focus. It takes constant effort to hide the doubt. Every time Lawler stepped into the ring with Bockwinkel, he felt that doubt. He felt the weight of having to prove himself. He felt the pressure of carrying the Memphis name on a national stage. And that weight was crushing, because if he failed, the crown would feel like a lie. Everything he had built would feel like a house of cards, and Bockwinkel was the wind that could blow it down. 8. Superstar Billy Graham, the body that made him feel obsolete. Superstar Billy Graham arrived in Memphis and changed the game. He had 22-inch arms. He had tie-dye. He had tan skin and bleached hair. He had charisma that filled the arena before he even spoke. He looked like a Greek god, like a superhero, like something from a comic book. And Lawler looked like a local brawler. Lawler was never a bodybuilder. He never lifted weights obsessively. He had a working man's physique. Normal arms, normal chest, normal everything. That was fine when everyone else looked the same. But Graham represented the future. He was the prototype for the body era, he was the template for Hulk Hogan and Jesse Ventura and Ultimate Warrior. He was what wrestling was becoming. Big muscles, big personality, big everything. Standing next to Graham, Lawler feared he looked like a nobody. He feared he looked like the past. He feared fans would look at him and think he was out of date. The fear here was not physical. Graham was actually a safe worker. He would not hurt Lawler in the ring. He knew how to work. He knew how to protect his opponent. He had been in the business long enough to know the rules, but his presence hurt Lawler's status. Just standing next to Graham on a poster made Lawler feel inferior. Graham's arms were twice the size of Lawler's. His chest was massive. His presence was magnetic. Fans looked at Graham and saw a superstar. They looked at Lawler and saw a guy from Memphis. That comparison gnawed at Lawler. It made him question his value. It made him wonder if his time was running out. It made him think that maybe the business was passing him by. He had to prove that charisma and skill could compete with muscles and looks. The fear of obsolescence is quiet but deadly. It creeps in. It makes you question your value. It makes you wonder if your best days are behind you. Lawler feared that the business was passing him by. He feared that fans would look at Graham and think Lawler was old news. He feared that promoters would look at Graham and think that was the future. He feared that one day soon, the phone would stop ringing, the bookings would dry up, and someone like Graham would take his spot. So he compensated. He cut better promos. He worked harder in the ring. He found ways to make himself relevant. He emphasized his strengths, his connection to the Memphis fans, his ability to generate heat, his willingness to brawl and bleed. But the insecurity remained, because when you stand next to someone who looks better, sounds better, and represents the future, you start to wonder if your reign is ending. That fear haunted Lawler every time Graham came to town. It reminded him that the crown was not permanent. It reminded him that younger, bigger, better-looking men were always coming, and one day they would replace him. That day was inevitable. The only question was when. 7. Bret Hart, the man who could give a receipt. The feud between Jerry Lawler and Bret Hart in the WWF from 1993 to 1995 is considered Lawler's greatest national work. It gave fans the Burger King jokes and the Kiss My Foot match. It gave them entertainment and spectacle and moments they still remember today. But behind the comedy was real tension, real heat, real fear. Lawler's job was to be the villain, to make people hate him. To do that, he insulted Bret's family. He mocked Bret's parents, Stu and Helen Hart. He called them old. He called them foolish. He said they created more tragedies than Shakespeare. It was a vicious line. It cut deep. It was personal. It crossed a line that most wrestlers would not cross, and it sold tickets. It made people want to see Bret destroy Lawler, but it also made Lawler a target. The heat from the Hart family was real. Stu and Helen were elderly legends. They had built a wrestling dynasty in Calgary. They had trained some of the best wrestlers in the world. They had earned respect from everyone in the business. And Bret took the insults personally, very personally. Lawler knew that Bret was a legitimate tough guy. Bret was a graduate of the Hart Dungeon. That basement in Calgary was famous for breaking men. It was a torture chamber where Stu Hart taught submission holds that could cripple. It taught pain. It taught how to hurt someone and how to survive being hurt. Bret had survived that. He had mastered it. He knew every hold, every counter, every way to make someone submit. And now Lawler had insulted his family. Lawler feared that Bret might issue a receipt. A receipt is a real punch or a painful hold given to settle a score. It is the wrestling world's way of saying you went too far. It is retribution. In their cage matches, the crowds were near riotous. The intensity was off the charts. Fans screamed. They threw things. They wanted blood. They wanted Bret to destroy Lawler. And Lawler walked on eggshells. He pushed the envelope to sell tickets. But he also knew that if he pushed too far, Bret had the technical ability to cripple him. Bret could lock in a hold that would tear ligaments. He could apply pressure that would cause real damage. And he could make it look like an accident. This was the fear of retribution. Lawler chased heat by insulting family. Then he feared the payback. He was mouthy outside the ring, but inside the ring, he was careful. He watched Bret's eyes. He felt the tension in every hold. He paid attention to how tight Bret applied submissions. He knew that one wrong move could turn this from a work into a shoot, because a man who defends his family's honor is not a man you want to anger. Bret's family meant everything to him. They were his foundation, his identity, his legacy, and Lawler had attacked that. He had mocked it. He had made it a joke for ticket sales. So every time Lawler stepped into the cage with Bret, he feared that this would be the night. The night Bret decided that the insults were too much. The night Bret decided to make it real. The night Bret decided that a receipt was necessary. That fear kept Lawler sharp. It kept him focused. It kept him from going too far. But it also kept him scared, because deep down, he knew he deserved a receipt. He knew he had crossed lines, and he knew that Bret had every right to make him pay for it. 6. Jos LeDuc, the man who cut himself to prove a point. Jos LeDuc was a massive Canadian lumberjack. He had the size to intimidate anyone. He stood tall and looked dangerous. He had the build of someone who had done hard labor his entire life. But size was not what scared Lawler. Plenty of big men had come through Memphis. Size alone was not enough to create fear. It was LeDuc's commitment to his character. It was his intensity. It was the fact that he seemed to have abandoned all safeguards. The defining moment came during a live television interview. LeDuc wanted to prove his hatred for Lawler. He wanted to show the fans that this was real, that his anger was not an act. So he took a double-edged axe, a real axe, sharp, heavy, dangerous, and he carved a line into his own arm. He cut himself. Real blood poured out. The camera kept rolling. The fans watching at home were horrified. No one had ever seen anything like it. And Lawler stood nearby, genuinely disturbed. His face showed real fear, real shock, because the logic was simple and terrifying. If this man is willing to take an axe to his own flesh just to cut a promo, what will he do to me in the ring? LeDuc's intensity bordered on insanity. It felt less like a wrestling angle and more like a descent into madness. He was not acting. He was living his character. Facing him was a psychological hurdle. Lawler had to enter the ring with a man who felt more like a public execution than a performance. LeDuc was not playing a character. He was living it. He breathed it. He bled for it, literally. And that made him unpredictable. The fear here was not just physical, it was mental. Lawler had to convince himself to step into the ring. He had to push past the primal instinct that told him to run. He had to tell himself that it was just a show, that LeDuc would not actually hurt him. But when a man cuts himself with an axe on live television, it stops feeling like a show. It feels like danger, real danger, the kind you cannot fake. Because when a man proves he can hurt himself, he proves he can hurt you. And LeDuc proved it every time he appeared on television. He proved it with every promo, every interview, every segment. He brought that intensity, that madness, that willingness to bleed. Lawler sold fear to the fans because he felt it. He was not acting. He was surviving. He was managing the terror of facing someone who had crossed a line that no one else would cross. And that terror showed in his eyes. It showed in his body language. It showed in the way he moved around LeDuc, carefully, slowly, like you move around a wild animal. Because that is what LeDuc felt like. A wild animal with an axe. An animal that did not understand limits. An animal that did not care about consequences. And you cannot reason with an animal. You can only hope it does not attack. 5. Terry Funk, the madman who loved chaos. Terry Funk was a former NWA world champion. He had credibility. He had respect. He had a legacy that spanned decades. He came from a wrestling family. His father was a legend. Terry himself had held the biggest prize in the business. But in the 1980s, he reinvented himself as a hardcore lunatic, and that reinvention terrified Jerry Lawler. Funk's fear factor came from his absolute disregard for human safety. He did not care about his own body, and he did not care about yours. Pain was nothing to him. Blood was nothing to him. Injury was nothing to him. He would do whatever it took to get a reaction. Lawler and Funk had the legendary empty arena match at the Mid-South Coliseum. It was a precursor to cinematic wrestling. It was innovative. It was groundbreaking. Fans talked about it for years, but it was also unhinged. Funk's promos during that time were bizarre. He accused Lawler of being a lover of chickens. He ranted and raved. He said things that made no sense. He antagonized the Memphis crowd to the point of near riot. He wanted them angry. He wanted them violent. And inside the ring, Funk was chaos incarnate. He threw punches that connected, real punches that left marks, punches that hurt. He threw beer bottles with reckless abandon. He did not check where they were landing. He just threw them. He threw branding irons. He threw chairs. He threw anything he could find. Lawler knew that facing Funk meant accepting that he was going to bleed. There was no avoiding it. It was not a question of if, it was a question of how much. Funk's philosophy was simple. If he hurt himself, the fans would believe. If he hurt Lawler, the fans would believe even more. Pain was the currency of belief, and Funk spent that currency freely. He would cut himself. He would throw himself into steel. He would take bumps that made no sense, and he expected his opponent to do the same. This lack of self-preservation made Funk a terrifying opponent. He was a man who viewed riots as flattery. To a rational businessman like Lawler, that was insane. Riots meant lawsuits. Riots meant police. Riots meant insurance claims. Riots meant the end of the territory, but Funk welcomed them. He smiled when the crowd got violent. He encouraged it. Lawler needed order. He needed the story to make sense. He needed the fans to believe, but also to stay in their seats. He needed control, but Funk did not care about the story. He cared about the chaos. He cared about the moment. He cared about the visceral reaction. He wanted to see people lose their minds. And Lawler could not control chaos. He could only survive it. So every match with Funk was a test, not of skill, but of endurance, of willingness to step into madness and come out alive. Funk would hit him with something heavy. Lawler would bleed. The fans would scream, and Funk would smile. That smile haunted Lawler, because it was the smile of a man who was enjoying the pain. You can only hope to survive him. You can only hope that when the bell rings, you can still walk. And every time Lawler faced Funk, that was the only goal. Not to win, not to look good, just to survive. 4. Bill Dundee, the safest enemy and the hardest work. Bill Dundee is the twist in this story. He was Lawler's best friend. He was his booking partner. He was his greatest rival. They wrestled hundreds, maybe thousands of times. They knew each other's moves. They knew each other's timing. They knew each other's weaknesses. They knew each other better than anyone. And Lawler feared him, not because Dundee would hurt him, but because of the stakes. The Lawler versus Dundee rivalry was the emergency button for Memphis. Whenever attendance dipped, whenever business was bad, whenever they needed a guaranteed sellout, the promotion booked Lawler versus Dundee in a loser leaves town match. The pressure on those matches was crushing. Everything was on the line. If they failed to deliver, the territory starved. If the match was bad, fans would stop coming. If the finish did not work, people would feel cheated. Lawler feared them because the chemistry had to be perfect. One mistake and the fans would turn. One bad match and the money would dry up. One botched finish and years of goodwill would evaporate. But the fear went deeper. Wrestling the same man for decades was grueling, physically and mentally exhausting. Dundee was smaller, faster, and had endless cardio. He could go 60 minutes at full speed without slowing down. Lawler had to keep up. He had to match that intensity. He had to make every match feel fresh, even though they had wrestled 1,000 times before. How do you make the 1,000th match feel like the first? How do you keep fans invested in a rivalry they have seen for years? That was the pressure. Keeping up with Dundee in 60-minute draws or intense brawls wore Lawler down. He admitted that the mental and physical exhaustion of the Dundee feud was a source of deep anxiety, because it never ended. Every time they settled one feud, another one started. Every time they had a great match, the next one had to be better. The bar kept rising, and Lawler feared that one day he would not be able to clear it. One day his body would give out. One day he would not be able to keep up with Dundee's pace. And when that day came, everything would collapse. Yet here is the paradox. Dundee was the safest worker on this list. Lawler trusted Dundee with his life. In the ring, Dundee would never hurt him. Never. They had a bond that went beyond wrestling. They were brothers in every sense but blood. The fear was not physical, it was professional. It was the fear of stagnation, of letting the fans down, of being unable to deliver when it mattered most. Failure meant that maybe he was not good enough after all. 3. The Moondogs, the brawlers who brought real pain. In the early 1990s, Memphis wrestling changed. It became harder, it became more violent, it became garbage wrestling. The style shifted from traditional Southern brawling to hardcore chaos. Tables and chairs and weapons became standard. Blood became expected. The architects of that change were the Moondogs. Spot, Rex, and Cujo brought a new level of brutality to the territory, and they brought real pain to Jerry Lawler. Lawler has described his matches with the Moondogs not as athletic contests, but as riots. They were not matches. They were wars. They were street fights with no rules. The Moondogs were not technical. They were not graceful. They did not do moves. They were brawlers who used heavy, dangerous weapons. The specific fear Lawler had about them centered on their use of massive wooden crates and heavy chains. In traditional wrestling, weapons are gimmicked. They are designed to break easily. They make noise but cause minimal pain. The crowd hears a loud crash and believes someone got hurt, but the wrestler walks away fine. Maybe a small bruise. Nothing serious. Unlike the psychological fear of a shooter like Harley Race, this was the fear of blunt force trauma. He knew he was going to get hurt. He knew it would be bad. He knew he would go home with injuries. And he knew he had to sell it to make money. So he sold chaos because it made money. The fans loved it. They packed the building to see the Moondogs destroy Lawler with weapons. They wanted to see blood. They wanted to see violence. They wanted to see brutality. And Lawler gave it to them. With pain that lasted for days, sometimes weeks. And then the next week, he did it again. Because that was the job. That was the crown. And the crown was heavy. The crown was painful. The crown left scars. 2. Bruiser Brody, the man who could not be controlled. If Harley Race represented order, Bruiser Brody represented pure entropy. Brody was 6 feet 8 inches tall and 300 pounds. He was a giant, a mountain of a man. He looked like he could break you in half without effort. But his size was not what scared Lawler. It was his refusal to cooperate. It was his independence. It was the fact that no one could control him. No promoter, no booker, no wrestler. Brody was arguably the most intelligent businessman in wrestling history. He understood that his value came from his aura of uncontrollability. He refused to sign long-term contracts. He moved from territory to territory as a special attraction. Texas, Japan, Memphis. He came, he made money, he left, and no one could stop him. Promoters begged him to stay. They offered him more money, more creative control, more everything. They promised him the world, but Brody always left because staying meant being controlled, and Brody would not be controlled. He valued his freedom more than money, more than fame, more than anything. Lawler feared Brody because Brody could not be controlled. In the ring, Brody was known for going into business for himself. If he felt an opponent was not selling properly, he stopped cooperating. If he thought the match was not going well, he changed it. Without telling anyone, he would sandbag, making himself dead weight so his opponent could not execute moves. In Memphis, Lawler had to brawl with Brody all over the arena. The concession stands, the bleachers, the parking lot, they fought everywhere. Inside the ring, outside the ring, in the crowd. And Lawler described these encounters as managing a natural disaster. You cannot stop a tornado. You cannot control an earthquake. You can only try to survive it. Try to minimize the damage. He never knew if Brody was going to swing a chair safely or swing for the fences. He never knew if Brody was going to cooperate or go rogue. He never knew if Brody would follow the planned finish or just decide to win for real. The fear was constant. It was there from the moment the match started until the moment it ended, because Brody operated by his own code. He had his own rules, his own sense of what was right. And if he decided to hurt you to prove a point, there was nothing the king could do to stop it. Lawler needed scripts. Brody did not care. Lawler needed control. Brody offered none. Lawler needed predictability. Brody was chaos, so every match was a gamble. Lawler stepped into that ring knowing he might lose everything. He might get hurt. He might get embarrassed. He might lose the crowd because the match fell apart. He might lose his credibility if Brody exposed him. But he did it anyway, because that was the job. And because walking away would have been worse. It would have shown weakness. It would have shown fear. It would have shown that the king could be intimidated. So Lawler hid his fear. He threw his right hand. He brawled with the giant, and he hoped that Brody would play along. Most of the time, Brody did. Most of the time, the match went as planned. But there was always that chance, that possibility, that fear that this time Brody would not cooperate. And that fear never left. It was there in every lockup, every punch, every move. The fear that this was the time Brody would make it real. 1. Harley Race, the shooter who said he would kill him. Harley Race sits at the top of this list, and for good reason. Race represented the ultimate fear, the fear of legitimate violence, the fear of hierarchical power, the fear of a man who could end you and face no consequences. In the 1970s and early 1980s, the NWA World Heavyweight Champion had to be a shooter, a man who could legitimately disable an opponent in a real fight. This was necessary to prevent promoters from stealing the belt. If a local promoter decided to double-cross the champion and have their guy pin him for real, the champion needed the ability to break that guy's arm, to choke him out, to make him submit for real. Race was that man. He had survived car crashes that should have killed him. He had survived bar brawls where knives came out. He was a street fighter with a reputation. He had the look of a man who had seen violence and was comfortable with it. He did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He did not show mercy, and he made Jerry Lawler want to hide. The incident that defined this fear happened in the locker room. Lawler had produced a music video montage for Memphis television. It was typical Lawler self-promotion, something he did regularly. The video showed Lawler executing his pile driver on various legends. It implied he had beaten them all. It made Lawler look like the greatest wrestler in history. The fans loved it. It played on television for weeks. But when Harley Race arrived in Memphis and saw the montage, he was not amused. He viewed it as disrespect, a breach of professional etiquette, a threat to the NWA's credibility, because that video showed Lawler pile driver's Race, and Race had never lost to Lawler. Not once. Never. So the video was a lie. And in Race's mind, it was a lie that made him look weak. It made him look like just another guy Lawler had beaten, and that was unacceptable. The NWA champion was not just another guy. He was the champion, the standard, the measuring stick, and he would not be disrespected. Race cornered Lawler in the dressing room. Other wrestlers were there. They saw it happen. They heard it. Race did not shout. He did not yell. He did not make a scene. He delivered a calm, lethal ultimatum. 5 words, spoken quietly, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. If I ever see that again, I will kill you. 5 words. That is all it took. This was not fiction. This was not a storyline. This was not kayfabe. This was not playing around. Race meant it, every word, and Lawler knew it. He knew Race well enough to know that this was not a threat. It was a promise. Race was telling him exactly what would happen if that video aired again. And Lawler believed him completely. Lawler admitted he was terrified to step into the ring that night. He knew that Race had the physical capability to break his arm or neck and call it an accident. He knew that Race had the authority of the NWA behind him. He knew that if Race hurt him, no one would do anything about it, because Race was the champion, and the champion was protected. He never aired that video again. He never mentioned it. He pretended it never existed. Lawler's fear of Race was the fear of a regional kingpin, realizing he was in the presence of the emperor. Lawler ruled Memphis. He was the biggest star in the territory. He drew the crowds. He made the money. He controlled the booking. But Race ruled the world. Race was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Memphis was a small kingdom, and Race ruled the empire. Now we see the full picture. 10 men, 4 types of fear. Lawler faced shooters who could break bones. He faced mercenaries who refused to follow the script. He faced brawlers who brought real weapons. He faced insecurity in the form of bodybuilders and technical masters. And he faced the ultimate liability in the form of a comedian who could start a riot. The twist in this story is beautiful in its irony. Bill Dundee was the man Lawler fought most, the man who threatened his career in loser leaves town matches, the man who could have ended his reign 100 times. But Dundee was actually his safest opponent. Dundee kept him safe. Dundee ensured they both made money and went home. He did not rule by courage. He ruled by control. He managed fear better than anyone. He understood that showing fear meant losing everything. He stepped into the ring with men who could hurt him. He faced unpredictability and chaos. He wrestled through insecurity and liability. And he did it every Monday night for decades, because the gate depended on it. The territory depended on it. His livelihood depended on it. His family's livelihood depended on it. So he buried his fear. He threw his right hand. He pulled down his strap. And he made the fans believe he was invincible. But he was not. He was just a man managing fear. A man who knew that the crown was heavy. And the weight of it came from the 10 men who made him realize he was never truly safe. The king of Memphis was not a man who sat comfortably on his throne. He was a ruler constantly besieging his own gates to keep the populace entertained. He was always under threat, always under pressure, always one mistake away from disaster. In the end, Lawler's story is not about fearlessness. It is about survival. He lasted, he endured, he adapted. He understood the business better than almost anyone. He turned fear into heat. He turned heat into money. And in wrestling, that is the only victory that matters. Money and survival. Everything else is window dressing. Lawler survived the shooters who could kill him. He survived the mercenaries who could not be controlled. He survived the brawlers who brought real pain. He survived the insecurity of standing next to gods. And he survived the chaos of outsiders who did not know the rules. That is not the story of a fearless king. That is the story of a survivor. A man who faced his fears every night and walked out alive. Because in Memphis, walking out alive was the win. And Jerry Lawler walked out alive more times than anyone. He turned his vulnerability into victory. He turned his terror into triumph. And he did it all while wearing a crown that grew heavier with every threat he faced. That crown was built on fear, on managing danger, on surviving chaos, and that makes it real in a way that no scripted championship could ever be.